Welcome everybody here at Wellbeing of Women. Today we're going to be talking about bone health. I'm Dr. Philippa Kaye, I'm a GP, and I am delighted today to be joined by Dr. Mann, who is a consultant in women's health, which encompasses sexual health and reproductive health and public health, and she has a role in the National Menopause Programme, and I am absolutely delighted that she can join us today. So welcome. We are going to start right at the beginning with what do we mean by bone health and how is this linked to the menopause? And the reason why this is our first question is that I think that lots of people have this idea that your bones are like a cartoon image of a skeleton, white and dead. And that's not quite the case, is it?
No. So thanks, Philippa, for that introduction, and hello, everybody. So yes, bones are really, really important for your health going forward. So the structure of bones is really, really active. It's changing all the time. Bones regenerating and healing themselves is just a little bit more compromised as you get older. So, when you have a fracture, it can be really, really debilitating, and it can be really hard to get back on your feet again. So I think that what's so important is as you get older that you avoid the fracture in the first place, because of course people recover really, really well from fractures, but we want to make sure that you don't have the hard work of sort of trying to get back to where you were.
And that's also linked to with maintaining your independence and your quality of life and being able to do everything that you want to do. So why are there some people who are at higher risk of developing bone health issues? And why might that be?
Yes, so I think first it's important to understand that, as we get older, there's a whole process of what we call bone turnover. So bone being made and then bone breaking down and then bone being made again. Now, as we get older, the bone being built up tends to be a little bit slower and the bone being lost is a little bit accelerated. So what we're really trying to do is one of the risk factors for bones getting thinner is age. But there are also some other things that can put you at risk of your bones getting a little bit thinner. And there are some really obvious things. I know we talk about smoking all the time, but that is really a risk factor for the density of the bones, that is the sort of strength of them getting less. Important to keep your alcohol drinking within sort of what we know to be healthy limits. And but also there are other things that might put you slightly more at risk of reduced bone density as you get older. So it's often a genetic thing. So it's something that we inherit. And if your parents have been people who have had fractures, or you might notice that they've very much reduced in height. So that might be because they have osteoporosis. So it's always good to ask your relatives, ask your immediate relatives whether they know that they've got osteoporosis, because that might put you a bit more at risk. So secondly, we know that estrogen in the body, so as women, we have estrogen being produced by our ovaries, and that's really good bone protection. So if you have less estrogen going around for a longer amount of time, you might be a bit more at risk. And so I suppose the group I'm talking about there are people who might have an earlier menopause, which is when the estrogen goes down, or might have a menopause as a result of treatments they've had. So that might be cancer treatments, that might be a surgical treatment. They might have had their ovaries removed. So all these things, you need to think bones. Think, am I going to be a little bit more at risk because I've taken that estrogen out of my body a bit earlier on?
And I think that when we talk about risk factors, people always worry about the bits that they can't control. But really importantly, yes, there are bits you can't control. You can't control, your family history, for example, and you can't control getting older. But there are the bits that you can control. And those are the bits that we want to focus on sometimes. So I wonder if you could tell me about some of the lifestyle changes that people can do to prevent them having issues with their bone health later.
I suppose the first thing to talk about is really what you put in your body. So, thinking about nutrition. So what things are good for bones? Now, you probably know that really key bits of bone development are around two things: vitamin D and calcium. So vitamin D we get from sunlight, and as we move into this rather more gloomy period of time, the sunlight we're getting is a bit less, and sunlight helps us to produce vitamin D. So we know that between the months of sort of September and March, you're definitely not going to be getting enough vitamin D for your bones. And I would say really recommend that most people would need to take some vitamin D supplement. So we would normally say, well, we talk in units, so we could talk about 400 units of vitamin D. But of course, you know, if you go and get vitamin D over the counter or from your GP, they'll be able to recommend how you take that and how much you take.
Some people, though, just for people listening, that some people we would recommend that they had it all year round. So, for example, if you live in a residential home or a care home and you're not getting out, if you are somebody who covers their whole skin whenever they're out, if you have darker skin, that it is sensible to use that supplement all year round, because even when there is enough light out there, you might not be getting access to it. What about vitamin D from food?
Vitamin D we do get from food, but I suppose the most important thing to concentrate on for your bones in food is the calcium, because I think, you know, the combination of taking in enough calcium and getting enough vitamin D, whether it be from sunlight or whether it be from supplementation, are the key factors. And I would say that without enough calcium, you're not going to be able to develop the strength in your bones. And really concentrating on trying to take that in your diet is important, because that's something that we don't tend to supplement unless we really need to. So if you're having a very sort of balanced diet, you probably are taking enough calcium. And so the things that are rich in food are things like milk, cheese, all those sort of dairy products. Of course, you know, if you're a vegan, that might be something that will be more difficult to replace. So really sort of keeping an eye on what you're taking in. There's other foods where you can get your calcium. So things like leafy vegetables, some oily fish, things like tofu, things like some pulses are really good in calcium.
And if you are having a non-dairy milk alternative, that you could look for one which is fortified with calcium. So different ones have different things in them. Some have sugar, some don't have sugar. So you can have a look to ensure that even if you are using a non-dairy milk, that you can get your calcium. So if that's nutrition, which obviously is hugely important, what's the other main lifestyle factor when it comes to bones?
Yes, so of course I'm going to say exercise. And I think, you know, it's interesting because exercise is probably one of the single most useful things that you can do in terms of lifestyle as you get older. So, you know, keeping mobile is really essential for so many aspects of your health, but particularly your bones. And I would say there are sort of 3 different types of exercise to focus on. So, you know, one is just, you know, getting out of breath, cardiovascular exercise. One is strength building, and one is more sort of impact building. And we know for bones that impact is really important. Now, what I mean by impact is, you know, things like swimming and yoga, really, really good to do, but there isn't any impact. Impact is when you're working against gravity. So you're putting your, you know, skeleton against the ground. So you might be walking, but even better, you're doing something more aerobic. So you might be running, you might be jumping. Difficult as you get less, or if you get less mobile. So there's a bit of a balance, isn't there, between doing a lot of sort of jumping type exercise and also thinking about the pressure on your joints. So you have to really find out what's manageable for you, but trying to do all those 3 elements in some way regularly, at least 3 or 4 times a week, will help you maintain bone strength.
But it has to be achievable. It has to be realistic. If you go from not exercising at all to saying, oh, I'm going to run 6 times a week, that's not how to set up a, you know, an achievable habit. So I always say every little bit counts. Getting off the bus stop 1 stop earlier, you know, every little bit counts, and building up to it. And I think that lots of us have a sort of mental block almost about the word exercise, because it takes us back to not getting into the school football team or cross-country running or whatever it was that you might have hated at school. But we're talking about physical activity, and there's no right or wrong. It's not that you have to play netball. You do the thing that you enjoy, but try and hit those different kinds of activity in order to protect your bones. Now, we're
Yeah.
talking about bones around the time of the menopause. Are there any pros and cons to having treatment with HRT when it comes to your bone health?
I think that it's really, really clear that estrogen does help bone strength. So we know that. And we do know as well that estrogen can prevent bone loss, and it can help if your bones are already a bit below average in terms of their strength. So there may be many reasons why you do or don't want to take HRT, or even that you can't take HRT, and some people can't, and it's not the be all and end all. But I would say that if bone strength is a key risk for you, or is something that is important in the raft of things you're trying to think about when you're thinking about estrogen replacement, that is where there is a real plus. So we know that that kind of works well.
Now, how would somebody know when to go to the doctor with regards to their bone health? So before they've potentially fallen and hurt themselves, how would you know that you should go to your doctor to see whether or not it's something that should be investigated?
I think this is complicated for people to decide, isn't it? Because, bone health is silent. We don't know whether our bones are healthy or not, really, until something untoward might happen. You might fall over and, you might have a fracture. So I think that the important thing would be to return back to those risk factors that we were talking about earlier, and to have a think, for me, do I fall into one of those categories? I would say that it particularly for women, so we know that menopause, periods stop at an average age of 51. So if your period stopped a long time before that and you went through your menopause, or even 5 years before that, you've got a little bit longer without having that protective estrogen going around your body. So it may be that you're a little bit more at risk of developing osteoporosis later on. And so that would be really important to have a think about, should I be doing something at this stage before sort of things start to get in a worse situation. And then you might want to think about bringing that together with, what things happened in my earlier life. Have I been a heavy smoker all my life? Have I been on steroids? These are all things that will play into your decision to go off and go and see your GP and say, actually, do you know what? I'm a little bit worried about my bones.
I think that you lose nothing by having the conversation with your GP and discussing together. And it may be that different areas have different protocols about how many points you have to score before you go and get a bone scan, but you lose nothing by having the conversation. And the test that we use, as you know, is that we use a bone density scan. Now, I had a premature menopause related to my own cancer treatment. And I'm happy to say that of all the tests that I've ever had, that was one of the easiest ones. That you have to take off the bits of metal that are on you. So, it might be your bra or it might be your belt or whatever else. But essentially you lie on a bed with your knee bent and you have an x-ray taken, which doesn't hurt, doesn't make a noise, and it was all over in a matter of minutes. So to reassure people, there's no tunnel involved, there's not claustrophobia, and it's a small amount of radiation, there's no injections. It's a very simple procedure from the patient's point of view as an experience. And then the results get sent to your doctor, and you'll be told either normal or osteopenia or osteoporosis. What does that mean?
So those kind of formal measurements of your bone strength, and that comes through this scan that Philippa's been talking about, the DEXA scan. And what they do is they compare your bones with the average person of your age. And if it's a certain amount lower than that average, you'll be told that you're osteopenic. And if it is quite a lot lower than that, you'll be told you're osteoporotic. And there are these specially sort of scientifically defined ranges in which you fall. So they measure it against the chart, and then you'll be given a diagnosis somewhere along that.
If you are diagnosed with osteopenia or osteoporosis, what kind of treatments might you be offered?
It really sort of varies according to how much osteopenia or how much osteoporosis you have. If you're in the osteopenic range, so that's saying, oh, your bones are a little bit thinner, but not too bad. You're not at a huge risk for fracture. So you would definitely be advised about the calcium and vitamin D and the diet and the exercise that we talked about. And then you would probably be advised maybe to consider HRT if that was within the, if that was possible for you, but not definitely so. You would definitely be kept under review. So you would have some kind of regular monitoring. And normally we do these scans sort of roughly every 2 years because you don't really see a change very, very quickly. But sometimes people are osteopenic 1 year and then they find that actually they've caught up a bit 2 years later. So it's not an absolute. You can do things about it to try and regain some bone. Once you're given a sort of osteoporosis diagnosis, the risk of fracture obviously becomes higher. And again, you can still regain bone, but it's just a cutoff that says you really should be taking treatment at this stage. And what that treatment is, again, there's a whole range. The doctor that you talk to will discuss with you what all the different options are, but probably that's what they would advise you at that stage.
Often that's an oral tablet that you take once a week, but there is a whole gamut of treatment options available. Now, one last question before we go. What is the commonest myth that you've heard about, or some piece of misinformation that you've heard about bone health and the menopause?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think the commonest thing is that people think that their aches and pains that they experience are related to osteoporosis. And whilst it's very common to get all sorts of aches and pains in the menopause, generally the strength of your bones does not give you pain unless there has been some kind of fracture that you're not aware of or something in your spine that's happened. So you can't really feel osteopenia or osteoporosis. And going back to the beginning and saying that's why it's so important that you think about taking charge of your bone health without waiting for a symptom to appear.
Thank you so much to Dr. Sue Mann for joining us at Wellbeing of Women. And there's lots more information available at Wellbeing of Women or on the NHS website, and we hope it helps. Thank you.